What's up, MetaNerdz? This video is all about one of the most complicated pieces of tech in all of Star Wars, S-threads. Also known as Simu tunnels, these were hyperspace tunnels that carried communications across the galaxy. They've been mentioned in a bunch of Legends novels and sourcebooks, but it was brought into the new canon via the official guide for the Solo movie and the novel Moving Target, so it's an integral part of the Star Wars universe, and it's here to stay. So, how does it work? As you can imagine, it will eventually break down into vague, hand-wavy sci-fi sounding word salads, but it surprisingly stems from a potential technology in real-world phenomenon. The problem with galactic-scale empires and trade is that you have to travel faster than the speed of light. Even going as fast as 1 billion kilometers per hour or 670 million miles per hour, it would take you 100,000 years to go from one side of the outer rim to the other. Of course, ships get around this with their hyperdrives, but communications use a much more nuanced system. It's not like you can attach your transmissions to their own hyperdrives. I can't even really conceptualize that. It would be like saying you attached a motor to a photon to make it go faster. Of course, that doesn't make sense, but ships do use a tech called a hyperwave transceiver, and there are countless transceiver buoys floating in hyperspace, creating a communications network. Although the hyperwave transceiver creates the message, it is sent out via what are called S-threads. These subatomic threads would string together ship to ship, or home to HoloNet, all sorts of communications across the galaxy. They may be called simulated because they don't exist in the real space reality, and it is based off of ideas of FTL communications that involve quantum entanglement. The real-world tech idea is that when two quantum particles are entangled, what happens to one affects the other, no matter how far away they are. They seem to have no connection, yet they affect each other, a phenomenon Einstein called spooky action at a distance. He wasn't on board with this idea and thought it had to be the result of other variables, as it would mean that these effects are happening quicker than the speed of light. But this is exactly what seems to be happening, and later findings have cemented this as a part of quantum mechanics. In fact, describing them as threads is a reference to a way around this problem of locality raised by this spooky action, where the particles are not on the opposite side of the universe, but connected via Einstein-Rosen bridges, aka wormholes. What some people then theorized was that you could use this to create a sort of binary code that uses the position of these particles as zeros and ones. I can do things to a set of particles on my end and change them on your end. In other words, if mine is up, it makes yours go down. And then you have a code that can be transferred into audio or video, just like our computers do with their ones and zeros. But there are some problems with this idea that emerge when you consider that the person on the receiving end wouldn't know if what they were looking at was the altered state or if they were the ones who were altering it. Others then theorize that you could tell by just checking if it was coherent or not. When I check it on the receiving end, if the translated ones and zeros just made random gibberish, then you know nothing was sent. It would be like static on a radio, but if you get a complete MetaNerdz video, then you know it has to be a transmission. That, or I guess the Force itself is sending you a message. But there are many problems with even this explanation though. If you want to look into them, check out these videos which I have linked in the description. This one has a top comment with a lot of people debating why a system like this would work, and others pointing out that it wouldn't. But though this may have been the inspiration for the S-thread, or the closest thing we may ever see in the real world, there is another problem. In the entangled scenario, both the sender and receiver need to have the particles that were entangled. So even the theoretical version of this working as a way to send binary or a sort of Morse code would only be possible for ships that had already been in contact with each other at one point before separating. Each little quantum entangled transceiver would act like a direct line to different ships. There is some evidence that this is what was happening with the New Republic in Legends. A quote from the book The New Jedi Order Star by Star reads, "The energy-absorbing effects of the nebula gas rendered the woman's voice thready and full of static. Repeat, this is the New Republic scout vessel Gabriel, hailing the Millennium Falcon. Please respond on S-thread 609er. It is interesting to think that if the nebula is affecting it, either the signals do not directly connect through hyperspace but emerge around a ship and get picked up like a normal radio signal, or the S-threads do connect directly into the hyperwave transceiver through their own hyperspace wormholes, and the interference was just affecting the ship's electronics in general. But honestly, the way they switch channels like this seems more like it's just changing a frequency like a radio. So instead of each ship having a certain line to communicate through, some real hand-wavy parts are introduced with the component of a tachyon gun. From that same book, we get a line, "She immediately set work stripping the tachyon gun from a spare S-thread spinner." I like the visualization here that the device spins a thread through different planes of space-time, as tachyons are a theoretical particle that can move faster than light. So perhaps inspired by quantum entanglement, but at the end of the day, it might just operate as a wave of energy that can be transferred into data, just like a radio wave is a form of electromagnetic energy, but this tachyon wave of course moves a whole lot faster. In fact, seemingly instantaneous across the galaxy. This would make sense when we think about how S-threads were essential for keeping the HoloNet up and running, but does seem off when thinking about how S-thread booster technology works. Mentioned in the Legends book, The Essential Atlas, they are described as opening up tunnels in hyperspace where none existed before. This was incredibly expensive, and most notably used to open up the Sanctuary pipeline, a new lane the Empire made to connect to the Endor system to supply the Death Star. This was brought back into canon via the novel Moving Target. In it, Akbar says, the Empire has used S-thread boosters to create and maintain a secret hyperspace route running from Sullust all the way to the galactic edge. He then adds that it was so expensive that it could, quote, bankrupt whole star systems. To me, this doesn't seem like something the tachyons could do. That seems more like an expansion of the Einstein-Rosen bridges. Just as the S-threads were ridiculously tiny, subatomic-sized threads through hyperspace and real space, the S-thread boosters seem to have been able to open these threads wider, from the subatomic to miles in diameter. Perhaps this required the creation of a matrix of interconnected particles, all the threads becoming one big tunnel, but honestly, that's as deep as the lore goes. But I would love to hear all your guys' opinions on this. Like I said in the opening, I know it gets very slippery with the actual science. Definitely look forward to reading your cool ideas on how this could work, or how this just really breaks down under scrutiny. Keep in mind though, that what I'm doing is never going to fully work. You can't turn a sci fantasy into a sci-fi, and that's okay. I enjoy trying to reason how it might work in the Star Wars universe, given the lore we have to work with. I know a bunch of you do too, so definitely let me know what you guys think about the S-threads and S-thread boosters in the comments down below. The only cool behind the scenes fact is that it was first introduced in the book Star by Star, but all the other books and references are linked in the description. So that's it for one of the most complicated techs in all of Star Wars. If you want to connect with us, help support the channel, or get your own copies of the reference materials used to make these kinds of videos, all that stuff's down in the description. Special shout out to our supporters over on Patreon, but most important of all, remember, this kind of deep lore is essentially finding the process of squaring a circle to be fun. And the Force will be with you, always.